Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neuroscience show. Hope everyone's doing well out there. Feel free to comment. And I hope everyone's week is going well as also. Now, I do apologize. I have been pumped up about doing this show all week long. And then the past couple of days, I've been battling a head cold. So that has not really helped at all. Head's a little clogged up, so please do bear with me here. I guess that's what you get for going racing motorcycles out in the cold and being around sick people, unfortunately. But I'll do my best, and we'll see where we get from here. Last time we went over what it means to actually become a new creation in Christ, and kind of went over some of the process of transformation, that of rewiring your brain and your body both. And we kind of ended with looking at ways and how to accomplish that. We got through, I believe, fasting and prayer, meditation, that is, stilling your mind, and the how that actually rewires your body and your brain and your body both. We're going to continue on with looking at a few different ways, and we're also going to look at some brain supplements that you can actually utilize, that I utilize personally, to also enhance mental focus, and it also helps, which will help with your studying and other things that you pursue as you seek to transform yourself. So today we're also going to be looking at the biblical story of Moses and the Exodus, and I'm going to try to go through it, looking at the transformative process, metaphorically speaking, throughout that story, looking at the psychological end of it, theological and philosophical end of that story, the ins and outs of it. I'm going to actually be using the 10 Commandments scenes from the 10 Commandments movie film from, I believe it was 1956 or 1955, one or the other, Charlton Heston. And then we're going to look a little bit into the Buddhism philosophy, the yin yang, and how it actually even correlates with some of what Christ is talking about in the gospel, as well as the apostles. And we're going to look at a more, I would say, secular story, mythological story, that is Dragon Ball Z. Briefly, we'll look at that, the ideas of continuously ascending, which we'll get to that as well, looking at Moses himself, how we constantly should be ascending different stages in our life, constantly pressing towards the upward call that God has in our life. And there's never really a true end to it, because you're never ultimately perfect. Christ is the only one that's perfect. So we should constantly be transforming and evolving, adapting, so on and so on. Before we get started here, we'll go ahead and say a word of prayer, and then we'll move on from there. Dear Lord God, Jesus Christ, thank you for this evening. Lord, help us to delve into your word and to understand what it means to transform and truly become a new creation in you. Um, and help me with teaching, help clear my head to be able to teach this properly. And continue to bless us and bless this ministry to touch people's lives and help us continue to grow and pray for each other and grow together in you, Lord, and to continue to ascend to the upward call that you have for our lives and to be a light to the lost world around us. Please cleanse us from our sins, fill us with the Holy Spirit in your great name, pray, Lord Jesus Christ, fall in heaven. Amen. Okay. Like I said, you can feel free to comment anytime, maybe certain questions or comments that you have, or to even let me know you're on here. So, okay. So we were looking at ways to rewire your brain and transform. We looked at fasting and prayer. I'm just going to briefly go over some other ways of pursuing this. Of course, I was talking about before of reading and studying difficult material. One issue with modern day, not just modern day church, but modern day people in general, is that we oftentimes do not challenge ourselves at all. But that actually rewires our brains when you challenge yourself, when you're reading something difficult. And I believe I spoke about that in the last episode, last study we done. But picking something up, if it takes you, let's say 6 months to read the book because it's that difficult and there's that much information, then take your time and take that 6 months. We're instant gratification creatures, as you can tell from the beginning with Adam and Eve. And so we want the knowledge now. We don't want to have to wait. We don't want to have to go through the process and the rigorous process of actually truly getting to know something in depth, especially if it's difficult. But there's so much good that comes from that. On a metaphorical side, stories of, let's say, I'm trying to think, the King George stories of the prince going to slay the dragon to rescue the princess or to get the treasure or whatever it is. It's the dragon of chaos that protects something about you. And you have to ultimately go and slay it. That's difficult. But if you want what is valuable and to ultimately gain that which is necessary in your life that really will help your life overall, you have to be willing to work for it. And you have to be willing to face that which you're afraid of. Oftentimes you'd be more surprised than not that most people are afraid to read difficult stuff. I mean, this is simple analogy here is that people are afraid to actually try to read something that challenges their current knowledge structure, that makes them uncomfortable. But do it. Face that dragon of chaos and see what value is there for you to integrate into that current knowledge structure and to ultimately improve you as a person and rewire your brain, creates new synaptic connections, new neural pathways, and changes you overall and your entire perception of reality. That's what it does. Ultimately, at the end, it actually changes your perception of reality because our perception is tied in with our brain function. And so when we're changing our brain function, we're changing our perception of how we perceive reality as such. Hey, Kim, thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. I wasn't sure if you're on this first part, so I am struggling a little bit with head cold, so bear with me. So reading something difficult, that's a way in which you can rewire your brain. Something, sometimes you can only read a couple of pages. It's that difficult, but read it, sit down, and when you read something, take your time with it. Read a few pages, and then try to close the book and really go through what you had just read and what you had just learned. Don't just always read that which makes you comfortable. Read that which makes you uncomfortable. Learning to play an instrument is a great way of rewiring your brain. Listening to new music even rewires your brain. Instead of listening to the same old things, try something completely different. I also recommend listening to something that doesn't have necessarily verbal words, auditory verbal words. Do something like classical music, jazz, chill wave, or something of that sort, and really take the time to soak in the music and to think as well, to critically think. And that's something else, with even taking time to really think. Most people, they've done this study, and I cannot remember exactly when it was done or how exactly it was conducted, but they had taken these participants and set them in a room, or they gave them a powerful shock, electrical shock. And vast majority, I forgot exactly the percentage, vast majority of the participants in the study said they would never want to be shocked like that ever again in their life. It's too painful. So then they set them in a room by themselves, completely alone, with a button that would give them that same electrical jolt. And the vast majority of the participants, I think it was like somewhere 78% or something around there, that actually within 15 minutes got so bored with their own thoughts that they began to shock themselves with that same painful shock that they said they would never want to experience again in their life. It shows that most people are afraid to be alone with their own thoughts, and that's a bad thing. You know, it's good to critically think and not fiddle and fidget, to actually sit there and analyze what you're thinking about, analyze certain data, information that you've taken in, and see how that fits in with your own ways of being, I would say. It's good to try to integrate things. And so critically thinking is another way of rewiring your brain, believe it or not. It's good to think and to constantly analyze to a certain degree. Now, you can overanalyze, of course, you can always overdo something. Exercise, of course, is a great way of rewiring your brain and your body, both. Balance exercises, vigorous exercises, all those have been shown to have positive results, not only on your body, but on your brain as well, and to rewire it, to change, again, your perception of reality. Learning a new language is another great way of doing that. Rewires your brain. Learn new languages. I like trying to learn the Hebrew and Greek language. Even little bits each day is beneficial. Just learning a word or two. You're just taking in more information, and it also helps enhance your understanding of other things as well, especially like Hebrew or Greek. It helps enhance your understanding of the word itself, because without the original language, oftentimes we can be misled by the English translation, of course. So it's always good to delve into that, to better understand your own belief system. And there's various other ways of rewiring your brain. I'm trying to think off the top of my head right now. I don't have a list or anything. So I'm trying to think exactly. You can research it yourself, various other ways to do that. Traveling for one is another great way of actually rewiring your brain. And it does amaze me how people do not have an actual curiosity to go travel or to go see something new, and they do stay in their hometowns, and they're remain there. And it's one thing if you have to remain there for various different reasons, but it's another if you deliberately choose to stay there, never leave, never go anywhere ever. It's like, that's not good. You need to get yourself outside your comfort zone. Go to somewhere unfamiliar and see what you can take from there, what information you can extract, what new experience that you can experience and take from that, and see what value is within there. And so those are some various different ways of actually rewiring your brain, which also, like I said, rewires your body. And what it does is you encounter, especially something that's difficult and unfamiliar, it not only rewires your brain, but it actually activates dormant genes within your cells that produce new proteins that make up your body. So, I mean, you're literally changing yourself, your brain and your body, whenever you encounter new things. It's very beneficial, and that's transformative. And so, yeah, we'll get a little bit more here shortly as far as the Christian belief. I can't believe we're already 15 minutes into this thing, haven't even got started on today's deal. Anyways, I'm trying to add a little caffeine and stuff into this to really perk up my slowed down brain for today. So those are some ways to rewire. Some some supplements that you can use. You can actually look at the video description. I have some links and actually just some of the stuff that I use. various different mushrooms. There's mushroom powder, organic mushroom powder that I use that not only has several different mushrooms that are good for your brain and good for your body, like lion's mane, for instance, but also has ginkgo in it, which is good for your brain. Creatine, believe it or not, most people think creatine is only for muscle building and bodybuilder and stuff. It's not at all, and it has little to no side effects when you use it. It's good. It actually helps brain function, cognitive function. So it's a good thing to add into your diet. Plus, you get creatine naturally from meats, which is ironic that you actually need that to function properly. Creatine, believe it or not, and you get it predominantly from meats. And yet you have the World Economic Forum and the UN telling you need to go completely vegan and eat no meats at all, and there's no creatine, and that's just one of the one of the nutrients that you'll be lacking from doing that diet, which impairs cognitive function. So there's nothing good comes from that. Taurine's another one, great for cognitive function enhancement. Ginseng. I'm trying to think. Guarana, that's actually what I'm drinking right now. Guarana seed. I thought there was one more. I just cannot think of it at this very moment. Perhaps there's not, I guess. But it's in the description. You can check it out. Those are things also, getting plenty of omega-3s, things of that nature, very beneficial for your brain. So it helps you function better to be able to tackle whatever it is that you're seeking to rewire your brain, whatever new information, whatever difficult thing that difficult or unfamiliar thing that you're trying to study. It'll actually help enhance your focus to be able to tackle it in a much more productive means, let's say. So, okay, we got through that part. Didn't mean to be so boring on that end. So we're going to look at the story of Moses, and I got some of these pictures kind of scattered abroad, but we'll go ahead and I'll do the best I can here. Ten Commandments. I don't know how many of you guys like that movie. I actually enjoy it quite much. Even my children like that movie. It's kind of funny. So here's the beginning of the Moses story, where Moses is an adopted prince. He's adopted, becomes prince. And Egypt initially represents that which is known, that is the known territory. He's confident, he's secure. This is the familiar. And you can see he's getting things done. Things are pretty good for the most part. And of course, for those that actually have seen the movie, I'm trying to remember. There we go. So you got his brother Ramsey. Now, of course, the film is a bit off from the actual biblical description, the story narrative it is, but either way I can do for now. So this is the familiar, and he's the good prince. He's a good guy. He's trying to get work done, and then he's in that familiar territory. And that represents, that's symbolic of us as individuals. Before we begin the process of transformation, we're in the area that is familiar. And, and here's where he gets caught off guard, and to a certain extent, caught off guard, and is escapes. Well, in the movie, he doesn't escape. He's forced out into the wilderness. But in the biblical narrative, he actually escapes out there. So he, kind of deliberately chooses to go out into the wilderness. Why? Here he doesn't. He kind of chooses, but kind of doesn't. He's more forced into the wilderness. And what's interesting about that? So the psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the forefathers, I would say, of psychology, had stated, a couple of different rules that whenever a patient came in, they had to admit that something was wrong. If they were seeking to, they had to admit that there was something wrong with them. And then they had to be willing to go through therapy. Those were the, prerequisites of therapy itself. It's that, a patient had to be willing to admit that there's a problem, and to be willing to go through the process of therapy itself. The reason I state this is the fact that whenever we're going on a transformative journey, there's a couple of ways that people can go. Let's say, so whenever someone has an issue that arises, some trial, kind of like the book of James talks about, we'll get to that here shortly, is that whenever they have some trial, there's one or two things that can happen to an individual. They can either willingly look at it and go, okay, I'm going to go through this process, and I'm going to see what information I can extract from this. And that's more, as I was talking about in the previous show, I know I'm kind of scattered here. I do forgive me. Is the fact that that's right hemisphere dominant in our brain. So we're grafting in the information, and we're looking at the whole of the context rather than pinpointing and using precision that's dominant within the left hemisphere. And we're extracting the information and then storing it over into the left hemisphere. You have to be open to the experience, and you have to see exactly what it is. So that's a willingness of like, okay, there's this problem. I see the problem. That's admitting that there's a problem, and then seeking to find a solution to the problem, and seeing what you can learn and graft in that's ultimately going to transform you into a new person. And so God, puts us in certain things, that certain situations, and allows things to rise up to ultimately tackle and to learn and to seek what knowledge we can get to transform us. And that takes the right hemisphere activation to be able to do that. And what's interesting is Christ, he said you have to become, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something akin to that you have to become like little children to inherit the kingdom of God. And he said something else just like that. And I thought about that a little while, and it really struck me is because children use a lot of right hemisphere, a lot of the right hemisphere, and that's why they're able to learn so much. They soak things up. Why us as adults, as we get older and grow into adults, we become more left hemisphere dominant. We tend to fixate. We have what's already stored. This makes up the whole, and we kind of it's harder for us to learn. But there are ways. Well, just like I was talking about with rewiring your brain. If you willingly put yourself out there, seek out new information, see what's all there, then you start activating the right hemisphere to be able to graft in new knowledge rather than coming at something going, I already know the answer. That's the problem. As adults, we have this knowledge structure built in the left side going, okay, well, we already know the answer to the problem, even though we don't, and which is akin to ego. And Christ even says something along the lines of humbling yourself as little children. And I think more than anything, that's what he was meaning by it, is that you have to humble yourself, see what you can learn, activate that right hemisphere so you can ultimately graft in new information to store, because you store information in the left hemisphere to take into there. But if you're already coming at something, a situation, as though you already know something, you're already on the defensive, you're not going to graft in any new information. So you have to be willing to not only admit that there's a problem. Let's say there's not necessarily a problem. You willingly go out to learn something like traveling, for instance. You have to be willing to go, I don't know everything. So what is there that I can learn? And then you go in and start grafting in new information, and then you try to store it. So you come in with that open mind. Trade open was, I believe you can, there's ways to improve personality trait openness. And what's interesting is personality trait, I know I'm kind of switching around here, but personality trait openness is one of the only personality traits that is actually related to IQ level. So higher IQ, higher trait openness. Very interesting. None of the other personality traits are actually tied in directly with IQ levels. So that I find very interesting on that. So generally, people of high IQ have high curiosity, and they seek things out and try to understand and learn them. And okay, so he's going to be pushed into the unfamiliar. So this is the wilderness. And Lisa, thank you for joining, and Oh, okay. Yeah, I do apologize for that. I'm sorry that you're having difficulty with your phone and connection. Um, so, okay, so he's going to go into the unfamiliar here, and trying, like I said, trying to figure out exactly these pictures are kind of small, so bear with me. I know I had one in here. Where is it at? Well, this is where he's going to actually be taken, forced out of the familiar into the unfamiliar. And this is the beginning of his transformative process. Ultimately, beginning to his transformative process through here. Where is the deal? So that way I can. There we go. Okay, good. And see now that's the land of Midian with Sephora and at the mountain of God in the movie. And so, what this represents, I believe, metaphorically speaking, for us as individuals, is the stripping away and pruning of what is no longer necessary. So when you go through unfamiliar territory and you're grafting in new knowledge, oftentimes you'll end up losing certain old knowledge that's no longer necessary because new knowledge ends up replacing the old knowledge, especially if it's incorrect, if it's incompatible with the structure of reality. That new information that's being grafted in will replace the old information, the old structure. Um, and see that oftentimes that's a big problem, especially if you're a walking, talking ideologue, like some people on the radical left and even on the radical right, politically speaking, is that you end up becoming possessed by these certain ideas, and even if the evidence and data contradicts it, you're still not you're left hemisphere dominant at that point. You're about precision. You have it made up in your mind exactly how things are going to work, irregardless of what new information comes in that contradicts that, even if the information is factual and correct. And so the way to steer clear of that is to make sure that you're always analyzing your own belief system, what your own ideas that you conjured up within your head or that you learned over time, to see whether or not they're correct and whether it actually lines up with current evidence that comes about. And I've done my fair share throughout the years of trying to do that the best that I can for myself as an individual, to constantly analyze whether or not what I believe is accurate, whether it's philosophically, theologically, scientifically, it doesn't matter, whatever it is that I've construed in my mind. And I'm always trying to learn new information that can graft in to enhance that knowledge structure. And oftentimes, as I said in the last study we had done, is that oftentimes whenever you learn new information, if you do it correctly, and if something comes in that appears, some new information that comes in that appears to blow your whole knowledge structure apart, your belief system, let's say, because you see it happen oftentimes with Christian. I've seen it several times, even with higher end pastors and stuff that leave the faith and become atheists. Because of certain scientific data that comes in, some new study, or they read a particular book, especially that with the God delusion of Richard Dawkins. I've seen people leave the faith because they've been convinced that God is not real and that faith is not real. When realistically, what they should have done is taken the information and not necessarily go, okay, this completely refutes everything, because it doesn't. And I can tell you how if you ever want to talk about it. Is the fact that graft in the new information and see how it fits and see if there is any correlation. But that takes a lot of extra effort. So whenever you are reading something difficult and unfamiliar and you're trying to study something, learn something new, not only do you want to take that information and just graft it straight in, you want to analyze the information. That takes critical thinking. Again, going back to where we were at earlier, critically thinking on that new information that you just acquired to see how exactly it fits and whether or not it's compatible, not just with to see how it ultimately fits in. And if it's so contradictory that it seems to just completely destroy your knowledge structure, and then it's going to take a little bit extra work. Let's say, for instance, on the side of what I was talking about last week on the idea of evolution, I believe evolution to be true. We have quite a bit of evidence to back that up, but I don't believe it to be true in the sense of what they have stated. I believe it's intelligently guided, and there's substantial evidence to support that idea. Whenever I was first learning about evolution, which I was lucky enough to stumble upon the Science of God book, which I recommend anyone and everyone to read, by Gerald. I'm saying it, pronouncing his last name incorrect, but Schroeder, I believe. He's a physicist, got a doctorate from MIT. Very, very smart, brilliant guy. He's died back and passed away in 2015, but he lays it out, evolutionarily speaking, in correlation with the 6 days of Genesis. Very brilliant work that he put together. I was lucky and fortunate enough to actually stumble upon that. But whenever you're learning about that, you have to take in that information and go, okay, it seems as though it contradicts, but does it truly actually contradict? And then you have to grapple with it. Ultimately, you have to grapple with the new information. You have to see exactly how it fits in. Trying to explain this as best I can, but yeah, you got to sit there and critically think on that new information. Try to see how it's compatible with the old information. See what needs to go and what doesn't need to go. So ultimately, getting with the evolutionary idea, I got rid of the literal interpretation of the 6 days and grafted in a new idea that fits very, very well, and ultimately end up enhancing my understanding of the faith and of the word, and strengthened my faith actually, and made it much richer. And so, anyways, so this is the stripping away of what is old and grafting in new information and replacing that. And so, and this is a form of maturity, ultimately. It's a form of maturity. And oftentimes, whenever you experience something new and you go into the unfamiliar, it's a beginning, because it's a journey into the underworld, essentially, is what this represents. It's continuing with the dragon, because he's in unfamiliar, uncharted territory. And so whenever you either are forced into a spot like that, or you're deliberately put yourself in a spot like that, oftentimes it has a radical transformative effect on the individual. And if it doesn't, that means you're not coming at it properly. You're not looking and perceiving the situation with the proper hemisphere, I would say. So you have to come at it with an open mind and see exactly, what God is trying to speak to you through this, and see what new information you graft in. So he's going into the wilderness, and this is the beginning of the stripping away, and he becomes a completely different person, even here, compared to the beginning of the film and the beginning of the story itself, the narrative in the biblical account. He went from high-end prince to now he's a shepherd boy out in the land of Midian, essentially the wilderness. But he's also learning how to work with what he has to work with, and he's humbled. And so then that's when, over time, and of course, according to the biblical narrative, about 40 years, this wilderness, we go through a certain extended period of the unfamiliar. We encounter God. This is like the initiation of ascension right here. He's ascended, and he appears later on in the film, after this part, after he speaks with God, he even looks different. And it's interesting how they had done that in the film, because it symbolizes that when we do encounter God, whenever we finally get through that wilderness portion and we grafted in enough new information that replace the old, after however long that period is, then all of a sudden you should level up and you should appear even different. There should be something different about you. And even Christ was saying the same thing. Ultimately, we're supposed to become lights to the lost world around us. It should be something radically different. And if there's not, then we're not doing it right. We're not engaging with that unfamiliar properly. Because at the end of the day, God should, in some aspect, in some ways, manifests himself to us through that unfamiliar territory, oftentimes through new information and that we're grafting in that just radically transform us and our understanding, our perception of reality. And then we go on after that wilderness period. We go to share that news of what we have learned, and people should see something completely radically different going on. And I believe not only psychologically but physically as well, as you know, Paul talked about his body, your body is the temple of God, taking care of it properly. It should be something so dramatic that people are, wow, this is way different than this person's way different than before. And so there should be something dramatic that happens. And that's a dramatic encounter with God, I would say. And so whenever he ascends into the mountain and descends from the mountain, he looks quite different. And I'm trying to figure out exactly where that. No, yeah, absolutely, Kim. I enjoy that movie quite a bit. Great classic film. Now, of course, I'm struggling over here trying to figure out exactly. I had the photo, and I don't know where it's at, unfortunately, where he actually descends, and he looks quite a bit different. I don't know why I cannot find it now, but anyways, I guess we'll go here because so this is him after the encounter with God. His appearance is even different. He has more confidence. He's approaching the king at this point, Pharaoh, and now he essentially, as an individual, possesses greater power. But you could say, on apart from the biblical narrative, the individual on the psychological level possesses much more knowledge, which is essentially power. Especially if you have developed the body as well. And so then you're physically powerful, you're psychologically powerful, and ultimately spiritually powerful, and you're able to tackle even the kings of the world, I would say. And that's ultimately kind of what it represents to a certain degree. I'm not necessarily going through this completely theologically. I'm also doing it psychologically on the transformative side. So bear with me. I'm not changing the story or the theological application of this. I'm just essentially stating some of the psychological application here and significance as well. So, going back real quick to him encountering God at the burning bush, God says, "I am that I am," which is Yahweh. It's also translated the becoming one. He's the becoming one, which is very fascinating because on the quantum level of reality, on the subatomic level, it's a field of potential, essentially. Everywhere is potential. Until we observe it, until we act on it, does it actually become reality? And what that also represents is that of chaos being turned into order. And at the beginning of time, God, the universe, the earth and stuff was tohu and bohu in Hebrew, which is, essentially chaos. It was chaos, and out of chaos, God created order. And that's exactly what we have, the same power as human beings to go out into the world and grapple with the potential of reality and to produce something of order. And the way to do that too is to constantly be, again, grafting in new information that enhances our abilities to be able to produce more order and to make a greater effect and to ultimately influence and impact other people's lives. And what this also represents to a certain extent is him. Now he's transformed to the extent that he can go out into the world and make a difference. And so as Christians, especially, when you become new Christians, you have the eagerness to go share the gospel, which is good, of course. But I think it's also good to take your time and to mature properly and to transform and to graft in adequate knowledge before you really start going out into the world to tackle and to spread the good news. Um, Moses had to spend time in the wilderness, ultimately encounter God, be transformed in order and be filled with power in order to go out into the world and free the people. And so that's symbolic of us as Christians going out into the world to free the people from their sins to a certain degree. Obviously it's Christ that ultimately does that, but it's us telling the world about Christ to free them from their sins. And so this is very symbolic of us in our own lives as individual Christians. And so, but you need time. You can't. I think it's immature whenever we jump up. It doesn't mean you can't ever tell anybody about Christ, of course, but to actually really go, the more time that you take to transform and to graft in new knowledge, the greater the impact will be. That's why most of the teachers and stuff and greats of all time spent many years of studying and grafting in knowledge and stuff before they actually went out and tackled the world itself. And so I think that's something of crucial value, is constantly learning and growing, and then whenever you feel God telling you the time is right, then going out to the world, then you're ready, you're filled with the power, you're filled with the knowledge, and you can go out and conquer the kings and free the people, essentially. Because the kings, ultimately, if you think about it, especially in our modern day and age, would be radical left on the political spectrum, but atheists and the like. It's like, in order to go out and conquer the kings and to free the people, you need adequate knowledge, you need adequate power to be able to go and accomplish that for God. So it's very crucial to take your time, and I think that's a process of maturity, of maturing and transforming. It's like, be transformed, then go out and tackle the world. And there's going to be various stages of transformation that happen that level you up, but essentially that ascend you to greater heights to go tackle even greater problems. So there should be these constant levels of ascension as it goes through. And so he has the power. He does the snake. He does the blood river. He's able to dismay the worldly prophets and to ultimately conquer the king. Of course, here's another deal where he stands before the kings of the world, which is interesting because he's actually, it's kind of symbolic there that he's standing higher. One thing, he's sitting. The other is he's standing and he's higher up than he is. So it's kind of symbolic. I'm sure the creators of the film had something to do with that to a certain extent, to symbolize the status of power. Because so and then once they're actually freed, well, no, that's not it. Like I said, some of these are very small. Let me see. I think, okay, this is, so once he frees the people, and now he's going back out to the wilderness once again. And so that's going back out to the unfamiliar, but this time he actually has people. And so whenever, I think to a certain extent what that represents psychologically speaking, is the fact that once you go through the initial transformation phase, and then you ascend to a greater height and people begin to follow you, you will also again at some point go back out to the wilderness, into the unfamiliar, to ascend once again. And oftentimes people will follow you in that process that will help them get to greater heights. It's not the same process of transformation that you're going through, but you're leading people through a process of transformation. You transform, you free people, they follow you, and then they're transformed as you continue to transform yourself. And so there should never be an ending to the idea of ascension and transformation. That's one of the big keys to it all. I think oftentimes we get it confused, and I think this is a modern perspective, is the idea, as I said, and I think I talked about it last week, is the idea that you work and you're born, you do things, you do your school, you grow up, you become an adult, you work, and then you retire and you die. And it's like, that's not the spiritual uh, proper way of viewing the process of life itself. It should be constant ascending. There is no such thing as retirement to a certain extent. I think retirement is, in some degree, a reprehensible idea to dumb people down. And I'm not saying retirement from, work. It's like, don't stop constantly progressing forward. You should always be progressing forward. And once you get to a certain age, obviously you stop working to a certain extent, but I think you should keep working on yourself and keep impacting people's lives as best as you can, and to keep grafting in and challenging yourself. Obviously it's going to slow down a little bit because of, physically you're not able to do as much, but you should constantly keep going, constantly ascending, keep going towards that upper call of God. And so, and I think it's fascinating too, because, even Moses is represented very old. Of course, he was, according to the biblical narrative, 80 years old, approximately, as he done that. And so he brings them through the wilderness, through the sea. These are all symbolic of transformation. And of course, theologically, the washing away of sins, purging of the old life of Egypt, going away and bringing in the new life. And so they're going through their process of transformation of cleansing. And now, Moses is going through his own. And this is where he has a even more dramatic encounter with God himself, is through this next phase of transformation. Very interesting. So this is where he encountered God as the fire tornado, fire twister, and it's very dramatic. And of course, in the biblical narrative, he asked God to show him his glory, and he said, "You can't see my face, but I'll put my hand, stand in the cliff, and I'll put my hand over your face so you can only see my back, because otherwise you'll die." And so it's a dramatic encounter compared to the burning bush. So the first thing, of course, and that's the way it should be in our life. Not only should it be, it's like initially we have this encounter with God, we go into the unfamiliar, we encounter him again to a certain extent. As the burning bush, it's a significant encounter, more so than the first time. And then all of a sudden you have this next encounter that's even more dramatic than the burning bush experience, that should change you even more. And it should continuously do that. You should continuously keep ascending in your walk with God, knowing him greater. And of course, as I said last week, with the idea that Christ has stated that, it's with faith and prayer and fasting, the meditation and sealing yourself before God, that allows us to really connect with him and to establish that relationship. Otherwise, how do you know? It's not just a monologue in prayer, but it's a dialogue between the two. And I think it's something I think he speaks to us within our consciousness as well as outside environment. And that's where the idea of keeping an open mind and seeing it from the left hemisphere really comes into play, pardon me, that you should, because he speaks to us and helps us understand what we should graft in and what we should understand. And he guides us along our journey of transformation. Because, ultimately, and that's my thing too, whenever people that are unbelievers talk about transformation, it's, progressing forward. It's like, well, where are you progressing exactly? You have to have some foundation in order to progress from, to ascend from. God is that foundation. And Christ even talked about that with the rock and the sand. Otherwise you're just building this little shack on the sand and saying, yeah, I progressed forward, I transformed. It's like, well, how did you transform? You can't necessarily transform into a greater being, because there is no such thing as a greater without God in the picture. You need God as the foundation to build from. Otherwise, you're going different directions is all you're doing. You're not necessarily progressing, because there's no such thing as progression. And that's why the idea is on the radical left side that, oh yeah, it's about progress. It's like, well, what do you mean by progress exactly? You got to have something in which you progress from, and you have nothing there that you're progressing from. So in order to have progress, you have to have a foundation in which you progress from, that you're building from, that's stable, that's there, and that's sound. And another picture, of course, that one's not very good, but okay. So here we got the where he's again writing the law. You see Moses, over in the cleft of the rock, afraid because of the dramatic presence of God, much more dramatic than last time. And what's so uh, interesting, so then what happens, and I've been thinking about this, I really been spending a lot of time trying to figure out exactly how to word this properly. So he receives the commandments. And what this does is essentially makes him a judge. It makes him a teacher. You could word it however you want, but a teacher essentially to a certain degree is a judge. Even as we transform, we should be becoming a judge to a certain extent, where people look at us and to a certain degree, they feel, they should feel comfortable. It's hard to really, they should feel comfort, like, okay, this guy or girl is confident and they have the knowledge, so it makes them comfortable to approach you to a certain extent, because you appear to a certain degree to have some answers, which really helps, of course. But at the same time, you're a judge, because you're representing to a certain degree all the things that they are not and that they could become. And so, Christ was that. Christ was the comforter, but he's also the judge. He's the perfect ideal in which we strive towards to be like. And so he's gracious and he comforts us along our journey, but at the same time, he's the ultimate judge that every time we look at him, we're like, we're not there. We're not there. We keep progressing. We keep transforming. We're not there. And we should be somewhat of a representation as such, that being Christ-like should be that we're constantly ascending. So those that are new to the faith, the babies of the faith, see us as comforters, but also as all the potential that they could be. And so they, it's not that, so you're Christ-like and you're setting an example here on earth. And you see that we do that as individuals, at least you probably should, as to some degree. Whenever, let's say that you're out of shape physically and you see somebody that's ripped up in shape and it makes you feel insecure, that's a judge. And I think oftentimes God uses people to speak to us. It's like, well, they're the thing that you could be to a certain degree, at least, and so it judges you. And you're like, man, I need to really get in the gym. I need to take care of my body. I need to do the right, eat the right things. I need to do the right things. And so it's a judge that speaks to us. And, at the same time, God's like, well, it's okay. At least you acknowledge it now. No, go ahead and do something about it. And you're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be overnight success. It's going to take time, and that's okay. I'm here for you. I'm here to help you and to strengthen you and to comfort you along your journey. So it's just and what that is the chaos order dichotomy, essentially working together. And we'll get a little bit more of that here soon. Of course, I've been talking for almost an hour now. So ultimately becomes, to a certain degree, becomes the judge. He's ascended to the next level. And you can see his appearance now in the film is different. Even in the biblical account, after he descends from the second time, because he goes up the first 40 days, comes down, breaks the tablets, gets mad. And so then he has to ascend back up to get another set of tablets and another set of commands. And he comes down and his face shines like a light. So again, that transfiguration representation, like Christ shining like a light, and his face is disfigured to a certain degree. He looks different, and people are actually afraid to approach him. So it's that judge-like appearance that he has. And to a certain degree, we should have that. And I think Christ has the same thing, especially in the book of Revelation. He's seen as a fiery judge that comes back to judge the world. And so there's that dichotomy that's constantly working, the judge and the comforter at the same time. And see, he here making the judgmental stance before the people. And so, okay, so we got through, man, I didn't realize how long that was going to actually take. Okay. So real quick, let's look at James. I don't know how far we're actually going to get with this, but So the book of James, James chapter 1, what I was talking about earlier, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God liberally and without reproach, and will be given to him. So that's the open-mindedness right there, I believe, is the open God, and we should constantly be doing that. God, what new information do you want me to take in from this situation or from this unfamiliar book or this, whatever it is that we're trying to, better understand in life, what wisdom and knowledge we're trying to gather, to ask God, and then he begins to show forth what it is that we're to learn. But we have to have that right hemisphere activation going on. And so being patient with the process itself. So faith produces patience. So I believe that this is going to work. And then you're being patient, and then ultimately have its perfect word, that you may be perfect and complete. And what that Greek word is teleos, which means actual completeness. And that's what it is. It's not necessarily about becoming, picture perfect, a little box. It's about becoming complete and whole, that you are able to go out and do that work. And it's never ending process, as I said before. It's a constant work throughout your entire life that goes into it. And we constantly be ascending to greater heights continuously. So yeah, teleos, to become complete. And as Paul said, not that I am perfected, but that I continue to strive towards that call, constantly being transformed, made into the new creation, time and time again. It's not just one initial transformative aha moment, although there are aha moments. There are times where all of a sudden you do a sin, but I believe that's after a tremendous amount of hard work that goes into it in the unfamiliar and dialoguing, I would say, well, with the potential and with God, and seeing what he speaks. So, okay, I'm trying to get through some of this now. So this yin yang symbol, don't run off just yet. So this is the philosophy of Buddhism, and I find it very interesting because much of what Christ and the apostles talk about are very similar. So what this represents is chaos and order. This is the feminine and masculine. And you had the middle path, which is the balanced way of being. And it's interesting. So if you actually, of course, I'm pointing with my finger as though you can see it, but if you actually look here, the red line there, the middle path, it has a serpent-like pattern to it. And what I believe that represents is the process of adaptation, continual adaptation with scenarios, because you're constantly, life, as I said, is constant potential, and sometimes it manifests as something of familiarity and order and structure, and sometimes it manifests itself as chaotic times, surprises, the unfamiliar, and you're constantly adapting in between the two, and you're progressively moving forward is what it represents. And so you're constantly going in between these. You're never realistically one or the other. You're both at the same time at all times. So you're able to adapt with whatever scenario. You're constantly trying to graft in the new information and to be balanced and unwavered as you go through life. And so I find it interesting how that is an constant adaptive process, which is part of the evolutionary process, that of transformation and ascension, that you're constantly getting better, and that's a continuous adaptive process to be able to get there. But so as things come in, you're constantly grafting in whatever information, and you're responding accordingly to whatever manifests itself. And so that's what it kind of represents. And so you're doing your best to constantly keep balanced. Paul talks about being temperate in all things, and what that means, it doesn't mean to abstain from all things. Obviously, it means to have moderation, balance in all things. You're constantly trying to maintain a mode of being of homostasis, and that's what our body does, is maintains homostasis. It tries
Okay. Wow. This is crazy. Okay. Wow. And it's actually working off my phone. Yeah, I lost Wi-Fi, went out all of a sudden, and I'm using my phone at this point. So if you're still watching, I guess please comment. But I think we'll probably uh, end it at this point. That's pretty wild. I mean, out of nowhere, and it happened right at an hour. I find that pretty ironic. But yeah, all of a sudden it just went out. That's pretty interesting. So I'm using my phone's hotspot right now. I'm not sure if you're still on. Just go ahead and comment to let me know if it's actually even working at this particular point in time. Okay, well, okay, well, so yeah, we will continue our study next time. I'm sorry we didn't quite get all the way through it. Long studies as far as that goes, but we'll definitely do our best next time to get through this. Um, Thank you guys for watching, and I do apologize for the chaos that manifested itself. But if you would please like and share, and you can check out, you can donate through the link in the description of this video, as well as check out my books and the other items that are listed in there. Anything helps. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your weekend, and I do apologize again. Thanks and God bless.